Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming back for more stories. Today is part 3 of The Improbable Silence of Moony Burgess. I've forgotten so much of what happened that night after stepping away from the old Ford and walking down the hill wearing my blue pack with the Army surplus sleeping bag and mess kit strapped to the outside in a mess sack, flatware tapping against the tin plate every jostling step. I crossed the clearing in view of the blue and green tent, dragonflies bursting from nowhere and disappearing against the backdrop of the setting sun, their wings like prisms filtering day from night. There now seems to remain startlingly little to report or amplify. At the very least, it should be stated that Andrew Winton was not a bad person, nor someone whom I felt did anything worthy of reporting, nor was I ever afraid of him, either before or after I awoke to find his hand moving toward the waistband of my shorts. It wasn't even the last time I camped with him, though it was the last time we shared a tent. That's what makes the whole evening such a non-event, something so minor in my development that I can recall very little, while so many other evenings of the same era are clear, scratched into my memory, like the names and dates and swears carved into the wooden desks of my elementary school. That camping trip in late July 1981 bore scant influence on my unfolding life. The first time I removed his hand, and the second, I couldn't figure out what was happening. It was as if he was trying to wake me, to alert me of a potential danger, a brush fire, or an intruder, but in a muted, cautious manner. His face was near mine, his chin flecked with stubble, his cheeks smooth, his breath warm on my cheek as he probed insistently with his left hand. He hesitated just a moment as he reached the elastic, just long enough for me to stop his progress. But I wasn't urgent because he wasn't urgent, and I felt sorry that I had to disturb him, not because I wanted him to go further, but because in the pale blue light encasing us, I could see his cheeks puffed in anticipation, his eyes pleading with me. And this was, after all, Andrew Winton, the scout who taught me the bowline and the clove hitch, the proper way to sterilize water in the wild, how to use a flat rock as a skillet, how to properly organize a backpack for a long hike, how to read a map and orient myself, and use a compass to find my position. His hand was cool and powdery and smooth and not dangerous at all. Though he said nothing and I said nothing, I pushed his arm back up through the bag over my chest and drifted away, nearly weightless, as if caught in a breeze. There were a few more quiet moments when I dreamed of dogs that were like seals, and may have been, in fact, seals, diving and leaping through waves instead of shadowy dogs running through tall grasses, or perhaps even dolphins arcing high above the ocean and cutting back through the surface of the water quick as you please. But then he returned, and again I pushed him away. I did not think he is a fag, or a predator, or even frightening in the least. Although I had already begun puberty and was in love with nearly every girl at Meeks Middle School, and had discovered masturbation one night while looking in National Geographic at a naked young girl my own age crossing a stream in Brazil, I had not yet understood anything of sex or desire from outside myself. My desire for the young bare-chested Brazilian seemed the only desire of its sort in the entire world, a pulling, ferocious need emanating from me alone. In the tent, Andrew Winton's own yearning was unimaginable and unprecedented. I couldn't begin to imagine what he was doing, or what he hoped to accomplish. He'd always been so goal-oriented, and had checklists for every conceivable project, a contingency plan for every failure or false start. I couldn't understand his actions because I couldn't see his goal. Again, I rejected his advance, and again he moved away and lay down, his face a whirl of plans and counterattacks. After a time, I awoke not to his hand near my privates, but to my own hand moving down his stomach toward his shorts. My fingers touched the elastic, and I wondered what exactly I was doing, what my own plans were. He was guiding my hand, his fingers encircled my wrist, and if my arm had been longer, I would have reached his penis. He raised his hips and the tips of my fingers slipped under the band. He yanked my arm with an urgency quite different from the gentle intrusion of his earlier attempts. Jolted awake, I pulled away, and he lay back, his pelvis falling toward the ground. He sighed. A disappointed keening filled the tent. He was frustrated, but I didn't know that then, nor did I know or recognize that Andrew Winton was in a position of power. And I did not recognize, not yet at least, his growing impatience. All of this was a lifetime ago, and to what extent I've remembered anything correctly, or whether it's been clouded or embellished, I'm not sure. Polly was educated about such actions by her mother, and to a lesser extent, me, when I told her that no one should ever touch her without her permission. And even in her school, where they spent hours talking about the differences between appropriate and inappropriate behaviors. As a kid, no one spoke to me of such things beyond saying, don't get into cars with strangers, and stay away from men in public restrooms. And Andrew Winton was neither asking me to get into a car, nor was he a stranger. He tried once, maybe twice more, to push my hand into his pants, and once or twice more to push his hand into mine. No one had ever said to me, your body is your own. I'd always been encouraged to obey my scout leaders, and I didn't put a stop to his actions because I thought he was being bad or had any real notion of what the word pervert or child molester meant, or because I was sickened by his repeated attempts, or that I thought he was a fag or a homo, because although I'd heard those words before, I didn't attach specific actions or behaviors to them. But on his final attempt, having simply grown weary of having my sleep disturbed, I pushed his hand from me and unzipped my sleeping bag and kicked it away from my body, and Andrew Winton shrank back to his side of the tent and covered himself like he'd been sleeping all along and said, is everything okay? I didn't say anything. I slipped on my sneakers and took my flashlight and my copy of Sports Illustrated with Sugar Ray Leonard on the cover and undid the screen and the tent flaps and burst out into the silent night. The moon-washed clearing glowed silver, the line of trees a silhouette, the creek lapping over its stones and sandy bottom. My heart beat soundly and calmly, and I was awake, alert, my skin prickly. Andrew Winton didn't stir. Over the hill a bright star, or maybe Mars, or Jupiter, or perhaps a satellite pulsed, a beacon. I didn't return to the tent. I sat on the rock platform and swatted mosquitoes and read my magazine by flashlight. When I finished, I turned it off and waited for morning. We were finishing a job on a big house by the water when Moony fell. I was spacey all morning, thinking about what my impending status as grandfather might mean about new starts. Even Moony's chatter didn't bother me. He was bitching all morning about being on the roof, his voice buffered by my memory of Polly's glow, of how I put my hand on her belly, even though she was far away from showing. Moony was just talking and talking, and his voice just blended in somehow to the entire universe. And then there was an unexpected silence that drew my attention beyond the roofline to the thin and gauzy clouds, delicate vapors at the very highest reaches of the atmosphere. A blur of sparrows darted past, a shadowy mass. I was at the foot of the ladder, my hand resting on a rung. I'd been leaning into a window, talking with some Mexicans inside doing sheetrock. They were sitting on 5-gallon buckets eating lunch, and I was giving them a hard time about slacking on the job. We were all laughing, and I couldn't have heard Moony fall, or heard the silence, or looked to the sky, or had the time to see the sparrows, because it all happened too fast, and the Mexicans later told me they saw Moony come down on top of me, both of us there one instant, framed in the window, legs and shoulders like a photo, captured and still, before the shutter released, and we were gone. I'd only ever seen one other man fall, and it was years ago, just after I'd started working for Dan Burgess, and Moony himself was still a Boy Scout. Moody had come to my troop just as I'd lost interest. Within a few years, I'd be a working father, my scout days light years distant. Moony hadn't been present, of course, the night I denied Andrew Winton, but he had shared a tent with Andrew on at least one occasion. He was a quiet kid then, and wasn't even called Moony, but was young Todd, and the few memories I retain of him are of a pale bundle of nerves. I don't remember him saying anything during the brief time our stints in Troop 145 overlapped. Perhaps it was his fall that got me thinking about Andrew Winton again. What else but the improbable silence of Moony Burgess might be the catalyst? Not only had his silence drawn my attention away from the Mexicans inside the house and toward the sky, but his hard fall was silent too, as if he was finally too surprised to talk. Later, when he told the story, he remembered saying all sorts of things, almost like he'd been chatting with the crew on the roof and the crew in the upstairs rooms as he fell, and even the Mexicans sitting on their buckets. But we all gave him a pass on this story, because he did fall, and even the most stoic man felt his balls tighten when he thought of that moment. We were all willing to listen to that particular stream of bullshit. In any event, me and Moony wound up on the ground. I was sitting up when the Mexicans came running to help. They told me later that I was trying to stand, but they made me sit for fear that I was hurt more than I knew. The clipboard I'd been holding had loosed its contents, and papers were everywhere. My vision was blurry, and several Mexican faces hovered in front of me. Moony was unconscious, but breathing, his arm twisted under his body. Everyone was yelling, and Randy came sliding down the ladder, and Phil came running from over near the trucks. This wasn't like a close call on the roof where everything becomes lucid and your own prickly aliveness fills you with energy. What came to me was how sorry I was for everything, for 1,000 failures extending far into the past, and for similar failures looming in the future. Sorry that I'd ever climbed up on her roof in the first place, and sorry that I yelled at Moony for being himself, and wishing harder than anything that he'd just start talking again. Say, "For fuck's sake, man, who's the asshole that moved the ladder? I could have been killed, and I got a weekend planned with this lady friend who's been after Mooney's junk in the worst way, begging me for it like a bitch in heat." But of course he didn't talk. Not yet, and his silence was my fault. He was on my crew, at my site, and he fell on my watch. And it would all come back to me and what I did or did not do to ensure his safety. And the thought of his safety balled up in my stomach and pushed everything I'd eaten upward. And I leaned over to the side and vomited, and the Mexicans helped me sit back against the house and kick some dirt over the mess. Soon the EMTs were there. Both my crew and the Mexican crew backed away, and we were replaced by serious and earnest young faces that spoke slowly and shined a flashlight in my eyes. As they worked on Moony, he started to groan. His eyelids fluttered. Dirt ringed his mouth. From the ambulance, they brought 2 stretchers and a backboard to stabilize Moony. I insisted on standing. My legs were wobbly, and the young EMTs helped me lie back on the stretcher. They rolled Moony just enough to slide the backboard beneath him. He groaned louder as they lifted him onto the stretcher. They bumped us over the lawn to the ambulance. The emergency radios belched and buzzed a stream of static and dispatch jargon. Moony and I sat for a moment side by side. His head was secured, held stiff by a neck brace and a strap. I raised up a bit until I could see his face, which was puffy and already bruising. His lips were bloody, and I said, "Hey, Moony, can you hear me? Moony, it's going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay. They're going to take good care of you." He opened his eyes, and although he couldn't move his head, he stared at me the best he could. The blues of his irises crammed into the corners of his sockets. He had me in his vision, and me only, when he said, "Fuck you, you fucking motherfucker." Thanks. Final part tomorrow. Thanks for listening.